our May 9th SEDA COG MPO meeting. Transcription started and the meeting will be recorded. As your warning is on the agenda, we always like to make sure we announce that. Helps us for preparing the minutes. And as it's been our custom, we go ahead and put the recording on our website. People that can't join us today or the public can go ahead and see what is discussed and what business is conducted by the MPO. So with that being addressed and calling the meeting to order, we have I think a new individual or two joining as their first time at an MPO meeting. So we like to kind of allow them to introduce themselves. I'll just kick off and open. Steve Herman, SEDA COG Transportation Planning Program Director and assigned chair of the MPO. So thanks for being with us. And as far as in the room, I think you're all members. You all been here regularly, but Michelle, you don't always come in person.
I don't.
Maybe online. So if you want me to just introduce yourself as far as in the room for everybody.
Sure. Michelle Brummer, now with GFT Inc. Our merger with Trans Systems was, okay, it's almost fully executed. I hear there's a federal ID number that's still being sorted out, but we are now rebranded as Surprise GFT Incorporated, but same staff. So Keith Chase and I are the ones perhaps you're most familiar with. We also have, there's 4 or 5 people in the Philadelphia office, including Laurie Matkowski, who's worked as a consultant. She was at DVRPC when she joined us, has done a lot with connected and automated vehicles. So anyhow, we are still here. We have a different email address. But I'm here today to talk about, in a little while, something we've been working on for central office called risk screening. Steve asked me to give kind of a briefing on it. It's not something we will be heavily involved in, but we think there'll be a benefit to you in future decisions on future agendas in the long term. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a bit.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. We're always glad to have you as part of our consultant team and join us whenever you can. And it's a nice informational item for today. So looking at the virtual participants, I'll see one that will at least ask to be introduced, and that's Chris Anderson. Just kind of background. You remember Eric Staley was the resiliency officer at Columbia County, was a member for quite some time. And then Dave Witchey, the chief clerk for Columbia, was appointed, but now segueing into Chris Anderson to be appointed as the Columbia County voting member. And so Chris, if you don't mind unmuting and just introducing yourself to the group. If you're at your desk or able to unmute. Okay, we're hearing nothing. Chris is the chatting associate or assistant EMA director and also handling the resiliency tasks that Eric used to conduct for Columbia County. So we'll work to get him plugged into the process and hopefully schedule an orientation for him as a new voting MPO member sometime in the near future. I think you hear us earlier, I believe.
Yeah. They can hear, they just might not be able to speak.
Okay, maybe you're just unable to speak. How about anybody else? Can we do a sound check online?
Steve, Mark Schultz with PennDOT. I'm here.
Okay, great.
Lisa Dooley, Town of Bloomsburg.
Thanks, Lisa.
King, District 3, PennDOT.
Jack Kittle, Borough, Berwick.
Justin Bocek, PennDOT Central Office.
Preston Mosteller, District 3, PennDOT.
Bob Stout, Monterey Recreation Commission.
Rita Rimal, Center County Planning.
Thanks for joining us, Rita. This is your first time, so appreciate that.
Chris Anderson, Columbia County.
Thank you, Chris.
Matt Wise, Senator Gene Yall's office.
We've got Matt Wise from Senator Yall's office and Michelle Holman from Rapid Transit. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Brown, Senator Ward's office.
Steve Gibson, Clinton County Government.
Okay, I think that pretty much took us through everyone, maybe the exception of Rob Manzella at the Luzerne County Planning and our peer at the Lackawanna Alternative.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Great, thanks everyone. Appreciate that round of introductions and getting acquainted that way. Our first order of business, as typical, is the public forum. So we just asked if there's something on the agenda that anybody wants to mention at this time or bring up to the group. Maybe not a general interest item, but something that's more of a action oriented or just something that anyone from the general public that might join us would want to share. So any public forum matters at this time?
This is Jeff from PA Silka Transportation Alliance. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention there are some of the transportation rallies have started, and a couple of the bills are moving. PPTA, the Transit Association, which Rabbit belongs to, just had a rally on May 5th. There's also going to be a rally on May 13th with Philadelphia transit workers, and others are invited to join, and there'll also be a June 4th rally. I just got to work. I can put some stuff in the chat later on, but the rallies are happening. And there are one bill the group may want to be aware of is House Bill, I want to say 1364. That actually puts the governor's budget numbers for transportation into legislation. And that had passed out of the House Transportation Committee earlier this week. And there are a couple of bill memos for funding proposals by Transit for All PA through Senator Lindsey Williams and also Representative Jessica Benham. So I can put those in the chat once I get in, but just wanted the group to be aware of the activity that's going on and some of what's moving in the legislature. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Anything additional for public forum? I don't think the Vatican's on there, but at least we're taking a trip to Rome here with news items with our public forum. From our standpoint, I know we shared with folks in advance, but unfortunately, the person that we had talked about last time was going to be coming in as the new GIS analyst to replace Bryce Buck had reconsidered. So we have that opening. It's out there on the street, advertised again. If there's anyone in your networks, feel free to send them our way. But again, they would have some planning and other program support for our department, but a lot of it is the mapping, spatial analysis, all our online mapping resources we've been developing of late and maintaining and upgrading those. So we're hoping to get a successful candidate and get one started here on the team in the near future, but that is again open as part of the transportation program. So let us know if you have questions or if there's anybody else in your larger networks. We've tried to get out there to more of the universities this time beyond our backyard ones to advertise it as well. And hopefully we'll be able to fill that in the near future. There's nothing additional public forum wise. We all had a chance to review in your advanced packet shared on Monday, or else have your packet in front of you for the printout or on your screen here today. The minutes from March 28th were included, and we'll look for a motion to approve those as presented. Thank you for the motion. Do we have a second? Second. Great, thank you for the second. All in favor, indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, hearing none, we'll move right along to item D. That's our TIP administrative modifications. There were no amendments this time. Sometimes just as we're developing the agenda, we leave that on there if there's any that emerge. But these are all actions, minor adjustments that do not require a vote. They occur between March 13th and April 30th when we download the management action reports. They're included in your packet, pages 10 to 12 are the District 2 actions. And so we'll go ahead and open it up here to Mark for highlighting any of the adjustments within District 2, please.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning, everyone. Wanted to start off there with page 10. And we have an adjustment on the very first one to meet utility agreement needs. So we adjusted a couple other projects to be able to pull together a utility agreement for the T439 over Kishkaquillas Creek in Brown Township. That's the road share or roadmap funded project, and it's moving forward towards a future bid date later this year. This next on the list is to add Pennsylvania State Police assistance on a project on Route 22, now down near the Thompsontown Bridge project. And the third, which carries over from pages 10 to 11, was part of a project in which we were planned to do some paving and resurfacing on 522 Walnut Street in Lewistown, but we were contacted by the borough and the utility company that there's utility work in there this year, so we delayed that resurfacing work on 522 until next year. So we adjusted those funds and moved some of those back to the maintenance line item there as well. Next on that list on page 11 was funds needed to cover accrued unbilled costs or costs that have exceeded our originally planned and federally obligated funds. These are all construction projects, and many of these we're working towards finalization. On the last on that list is also additional repairs for bridge preservation. We had additional deck work and concrete needs in a bridge preservation project throughout Juniata County. And then last on the list for page 12 was funds that were adjusted to cover an advance as part of the TIFIA or a state transportation program fund redistribution to the MPO. We use those funds to cover and advance some project funds from federal fiscal year 26 into federal fiscal year 25. That allows us to then move those funds in 2026 out to the reserve line item and cover those costs, be able to have those funds available for other projects. And as part of that, we were able to nope, I guess that was it. There were two projects we were able to move in advance funds, and the remaining portion went back to the reserve line item. So, any questions on the District 2 projects?
Great, thank you, Mark. Just on that last one, I think there should be another maybe slug of those TIFIA funds. These are nationwide funds, usually for big ticket major projects across the country, but there might be some more being redistributed and some other obligation freed up for projects within our region. So do you have any additional anything?
So essentially these are the TIFIA funds are funds that are unspent at the federal level. And then they are, instead of going out with the typical August redistribution that we get back, they're trying to provide these funds in advance, and we're showing these on the program. So they're coming back as program dollars. They were distributed through formula back out to the partners, so that we do have the amount set aside for each partner to draw down from the statewide line item. But yeah, you'll probably see a few more of these. But yeah, this is actually I'll say a better process that we work with FHWA on getting these funds out sooner, so we can provide a little bit more some more clarity on where the funds are going, instead of the August redistribution process, which we have to, I'll say, scramble at the last minute. So this is a much better process, getting it out in advance.
Great. Thanks for that update and supporting that process, and for all the districts lining up those projects that were, best fits for it. So appreciate it. Now this table, which we include in our PowerPoint now, we just kind of highlight some of the major adjustments. Those are like $300,000 or more increases. So those links take you out to one map if you haven't clicked on those, the status report for each of the projects, and then we try to put a Google Street View. And Michelle, recall this was something the strategic plan, but we said trying to use some more of these visuals and get people more acquainted with projects across the region. So to highlight some of the major actions from the listing here, we do this table and populate it based on what's being reflected. I think the first three are related to some that Mark had already highlighted, and then the other 5 will be for the District 3 project. So if you click on those, you'll get the status report in one map, and then take yourself out to Google Street View of each of the projects. Anything additional, Mark, or were there any other questions for Mark Schultz?
I have nothing additional, Steve.
Great. Appreciate those highlights then. And if there's nothing, then we'll We'll move right into the District 3 administrative modifications. They are running from pages 13 to 23. And Chris, would you mind giving us some updates on those?
Sure, Steve. Good morning. So our first item that you see on the sheet that Steve provided was related to an amendment that was approved at the previous meeting. This was just basically swapping two Interstate 80 projects. So that was approved, and then this is the financial maneuver to make that happen. There's one more down below that we'll get to see the whole picture there. We have a couple. I see a low bid savings on pages 13 and 14. So those $900,000 go back to the line item, and that's kind of how this line item works for anyone new, or we put savings here and then we take those savings to use for increases. It's just kind of our checking account for the SEDA COG region is this line item. So the next project we moved out a year, fiscal year. There's not really any major projects here. We have a number of cash flows. Whenever you see a $0 that in the boxed in area, that just means we have funds in multiple years on that project and we're moving them around, always to free it up to use on something else. We have a final design increase for railroad bridge. Another low bid savings. See on page 16, there's a big list of MPMS numbers. That's related to the Interstate 80 swap again. We have another low bid savings on 61-131 in Northumberland County. Then we have an increase below that for a construction phase on a resurfacing project in Columbia County. We have another very long cash flow on page 18. You also see at the bottom of page 18 an increase for the engineering phase on the Ridge Road project. That's SR 1024 that basically runs from the CSVT exit in Point Township over to Route 11, the other side of Northumberland. That project is actively in design right now. There's an increase to add some wetland monitoring. Our Vargo site, which was wetland mitigation completed years ago for the initial phases of the CSVT project. We have a low bid increase on a high tension cable medium barrier in Northumberland County along Interstate 180. Those are central office highway safety set aside funds, not from the region. And I should also add that the Ridge Road project is also funded by central office. Those are not SEDA COG funds, kind of came through as part of CSVT. There is in the middle of page 20, we are adding some deobligated funds to the line item. Basically, those are unspent federal funds from completed project phases. So basically just getting back money we didn't spend, federal money. There's a couple movements of funds in 27 that are, again, more of a cash flow. We have a increase here for $400,000 for SCM monitoring. Those are all of the stormwater controls constructed as part of CSVT. We're required to maintain and monitor those. We have roughly, I'm going to say 180 existing SCMs in our district. CSVT project roughly doubled the number we have in our entire district. So again, SCMs on CSVT equals the SCMs in the rest of PennDOT District 3. A small new state-funded project. Our maintenance budgets were impacted significantly this winter. We spent more than we had allocated on winter services, so our maintenance units are looking at their proposed projects, and they do have some deferrals that, were it not for converting those to tip funded, we would not be able to complete all the projects we had planned this year. I believe they are still going to have to defer some. The highest priorities we are going to try to convert to tip funds when possible. I guess the last thing I'd talk about on the bottom of page 21, we have a number of new, and top of page 22, 4 drainage studies essentially that in the region that our maintenance unit is undertaking. One of them is pretty high profile, I'd say. It's the Hamilton Underpass in Sunbury, that usually the first place to flood in our district. So just trying to see if there's anything else we can do at these locations to mitigate some of the drainage impacts. Anybody have any questions or comments? All right.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that rundown on all your balancing there. And then also in this section, we have our typical reporting on projects that were approved previously, but awaiting maybe formal approvals from other groups. So we had taken off the Sealands Grove access road since that was moving through and funded and added to the tip, but we're still showing the Marsh Road local access road program project there. That's been placed on hold due to the funding shortfall. Betsy Lockwood had presented last time, if you recall, and they're always looking for new candidates. We know others are in discussions for local access road program funding, so feel free to coordinate with Betsy. She helps to pull together the PennDOT teams, engineers, and we'll do like pretty much an abstract, like a 2-pager to go into DCD, and then a full application if those are solicited. So always looking for a good, strong candidate for the local access road program. That's page 24 of the packet, and that was all that we had included for this section, item D. Next, Chris, if you're able to continue along, it's our typical CSVT project status reporting, and Chris is kind enough to give us the bullet points that we put on this slide, and please go ahead and provide that update to members now, Chris.
Okay, Steve. Let me pull up another page here real quick. I think as I had talked before, we completed the earthwork, so we aren't talking about that project anymore. In terms of the structures contract, CSVT over Granger's Road works nearly complete. Cortland Drive's nearly complete. 61 connector over the ramps is nearly complete. Over 11th Avenue, the northbound deck's in place. Weather depending, we may have the rest of the deck placed, by the weekend. CSVT over Stettler, the beams are being set. The detour's done. The Granger's Road noise wall is done. CSVT over the 61 connector. Deck placement will begin later this month over Park Road. The beam placement will happen in June. over Attic Road, the substructure, the MSE walls, they've begun those. CSPT over Mill Road, they're just starting the substructure where the abutments will sit on top of those micro piles. As you can see, the contract's about 65% complete. It will be done by the end of the year. That kind of summarizes the structures contract. And then the last contract is the paving contract. The bid document preparation is underway. And really no changes from the last meeting. The right-of-way, utility coordination, and permitting is in process, and still planning to let that contract in the fall of this year. And you know, the whole southern section from the bridge south will, you know, we're targeting 2027 open to traffic, and then the 61 connector would be open the following year. So fall of 27 and fall of 28. And that's all for CSVT, Steve.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Always a lot going on. Hopefully this very soggy, wet season doesn't continue and keeps the construction moving forward, and we don't have any of those major erosion issues or anything occurring. But thanks for those updates. Any questions for Chris? Okay, thanks so much for those updates on the CSVT project. Next, item F, it's our typical work program staff activity reporting. We provide a lot within this section in the actual packet for your review and consideration. I'm just going to highlight a couple of these items briefly. First, on page 26, we have the fiscal year 25-27 work program that we adopted last November. A couple slight, kind of administrative edits were made in the month of March. And then those were reviewed by PennDOT, Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, and we now have the transmittal letter from both Federal Highway and Federal Transit that our work program is approved, and it's being executed within the state's contracting system now. So that'll take effect July 1st and be our kind of direction, key tasks that we're going to work on over the next 2 years. So that's available on our website as well for anyone to review. And we'll be getting into that very soon since we're May 9th already blazing through this year. On the tip side of things, issued a poll. Thanks to everyone for responding to that, to try and set up our coordination meetings, talk about local bridges or other transportation concerns for the next tip update. I had requested those by the 12th, and I think a vast majority have come in for the poll responses. So you should hear from me hopefully next week to start to schedule those meetings with the counties, the bridge engineers, PennDOT district, central office staff. Hopefully have a large number of folks to get together and have that discussion. And that leads into our tip project development throughout the rest of this year. So thanks for the poll responses and look forward to the conversations here in the near future. Both districts have responded to a lot of status updates on the existing local bridges, either on the tip or that were on the candidate listing from last round for the 2025 tip. So I'll have a lot to report on there and look forward to the discussion. On page 28, we're at the bottom, just want to mention the ARLI program, the automated red light enforcement program. That's open pretty much always during the month of June. So not very big ticket type of projects, usually done, some minor signal upgrades or traffic sign, pavement marking type of safety improvements. But 0% local match required. It's always nice to, that skin in the game can be offered up, but that's one of those few 0% local match programs. So if your municipalities are interested, I think that's always a good one to pursue. Page 29, multimodal fund side, we do have comments included in this section. Kristen's reviewed those, and so feel free to let us know if there's any additional at a local level you want us to reflect or weigh in on those 8 applications submitted for the PennDOT multimodal round. right now that's being evaluated. Comments are due from MPOs on May 23rd. Then on the PCD side of management of the multimodal program, those are open for applications now through the end of July. We know several are working on those, and a lot of times they're going in tandem with a PennDOT multimodal submission as well. So keep that on your radar screen, and for any of your municipalities and other project sponsors. TA set aside is the one right below there. And we have the notice that we were out for Steve Gibson and Clinton County's grand opening of the Phase 5 TA set aside project for the Bald Eagle Valley Trail. So that was a nice day, a good way to celebrate that ribbon cutting and grand opening. And so you can get across the Katie's Crossing Bridge. Remember our friend Katie DeSilva from Clinton County, planning director, that's named after her. And then snakes around and goes up and around through a nice area up toward Avis and Route 150. So Phase 5's open there. We're glad to always celebrate those successes from that former TA set aside project. And then from what we've been hearing, and if there's any additional that anyone from PennDOT wants to share, feel free to let us know. But we do anticipate another opening this year, 2025, as part of the typical every 2-year openings of TA set aside. So continue to advance whatever you can for any good candidate projects to be submitted. On page 30, just to highlight our PennDOT Connects items there. The outreach and beer exchange workshops, the District 2 session was held May 1st. May 12th, Monday, next week is the District 3 session. So if you've not registered, there's still time, or if you want to participate, that's entirely virtual. And any county, local governments, others want to join, please feel free. There's some presentation items and there's a lot of dialogue and Q&A built into those sessions. So that'll be on May 12th for the PennDOT one at District 3. And we've had a follow-up or two already from District 2 sessions, some municipalities that attended that and wanted some additional information. So put that plug in there. On page 31, on the trail demand story map section, we had shared this before and it was in our chats and in our MPO newsletter, but the article that we worked with Professor Weiler from Bucknell University on was published in Transportation Research Board's spring edition of the TR News, as they call it, magazine, about our trail count program in the first and second rounds, and now the third round that is in place. So we're glad to see that highlighted, and a major publication like that for the Transportation Research Board. And I was out to fix an issue with the eco counter that we have on the Bloomsbury Area Recreation Trail, Lisa, and I think we got that addressed and it's transmitting. It had to be kind of reset, refresh, restarted. And so I don't think we lost any data, but that's our automated counters, newer ones that are available through this program, and they're on the Bloomsbury Trail. And then we still have the other TrackX units in Columbia and Montour County trails right now as well. So glad to be collecting and publishing that data and make it available for local use and just our monitoring of the demand within the region. So we will look again, as we talked about, to get the Mifflin and Juniata next, and Sanger counties. Those are the 3 counties that have not had the counters deployed yet. So Brad, Lincoln, Jim, if you have segments you really want to see some count data, just let us know. And then in the fall, probably October, is when we would look to move them around and make sure we're touching all the counties with this program. So feel free to let us know. We'll populate that list and identify sites that are strong locations to go ahead and put these counters up in the future.
Thanks, Steve.
Yep, thank you, Lisa. Page 32. Just want to mention the newsletter. We weren't sure we were preparing these materials when it would go out, but that was issued yesterday. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at that, or you can check it out in the future. We share a lot of resources and information in there. So we'll update that section about the newsletter, and we can do our performance tracking on the openings and clicks and all that stuff for the next July MPO meeting. So that's hopefully in your inbox. Sometimes they go to spam. Feel free to check your spam programs when they come from Constant Contact or other newsletter sources. And then I'll just stop there and mention, Dawn, if there's things you want to highlight on the LTAP section of the staff report.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. A couple of things I wanted to mention is this is an appropriate time to be thinking about requesting LTAP classes for fall. One specifically that is in the process of being scheduled that seems to be quite popular with a lot of municipalities is roadside vegetation control. Looks like we're going to be hosting that, or Patton Township over in Center County will be hosting it. Possibly as early as August, but most likely probably September. The other thing I wanted to give you some updates on is I was volunteered and inherited the position on the LTAP advisory committee that Steve had filled for a long time before me. And the advisory committee meets twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall. And there's a few items I wanted to mention out of that might be of interest to everybody. Be brief on this, but they're not developing a whole lot of new classes right now, but they are updating a lot of classes. And a few to mention include the traffic calming class, which has been a popular topic that's being updated this year. And on May 16th, there's going to be a drop-in session that will be put on about traffic calming. Drop-in means you can log on to see that at any point. It's just an on-demand session to be able to look at. So you can get on the LTAP site if you're interested in that one. Related to things, there's also a new bike facilities AASHTO guide that's available now that replaces one that's over 10 years old. There is an ADA class, LTAP class, which is also being updated right now. And there is an MUTCD class, which has generally been online so far, but just as an update, if you're not aware, PennDOT is scheduled to formally adopt the new document by the end of 2025, sometime in the fall, it looks like. So we'll be hearing more about that as well. For those of you that are acquainted with Trish Meek, that used to work at Center County MPO and is now at PennDOT, she's working on developing a new mid-block trail crossing guide for rail trail type facilities, and that should be available sometime this month. See if that comes out, but that's being worked on as well. Another thing that's been mentioned, I think, before in MPO meetings here is that there's more of a demand for connecting PennDOT regular, I'll use that word, roads with ATV trails. And that's spilling over into LTAP right now too. There's a pilot going on in the north central region of DCNR to connect those up. Some of that's up around Renova in Clinton County. So those things are happening, and PennDOT's updating their policies, and there may be some LTAP consideration of how to incorporate that into the curriculum. It's also similar in some ways that PennDOT is doing a lot of work studying bridge strikes, looking at techniques on how to reduce those. And there will be a new guidance document coming out later this year, and an article in an upcoming LTAP newsletter about bridge strikes and what can be done to help prevent those. One other item is that the highway occupancy permitting process is being updated. And PennDOT's formed a team to try to improve and streamline that process for processing and approval. A lot of things are being done with improvements to the electronic permitting system. Districts are having regularly scheduled time to meet with submitters and other things that are happening. So keep an eye and ear out for that if you would like. One of the major things that LTAP is doing is starting to look at what might be called more soft skills that are needed by maintenance people, such as roadmasters. And we discussed this as early as last year, but they are developing leadership classes for those kinds of employees. And they're mostly going to be offered as drop-in classes. So there's 3 leadership classes that are being offered as drop-ins between June and November. One of them, and I like the title of this, this would not apply to anybody in the room here. It's called Difficult Conversations in Municipal Workplaces. So, that includes not only talking to employees, but also general public. And I think it's good timing to be able to look at those kind of classes. The last thing I would mention is some of the early things that I talked about, the traffic calming and the bike facilities and so on, are going to be discussed by Pat Wright from Pannoni. If those of you who know Pat Wright, he's very integral to LTAP efforts and teaching those kind of classes. and to follow up some of the things we worked with Michelle and her team on with the strategic plan of having more presentations at the MPO meeting. Pat will be on, I don't know if he'll be here in person, I think maybe just virtual, but he's going to be giving presentations on that at our July meeting. So I think those will be good topics, and Pat's excellent at presenting and answering questions. So put that on your calendar if you would like, and we'll look forward to having Pat as part of our July meeting. So that's LTAP in a nutshell.
Great, thanks a lot going on, course wise, training wise, publication wise, so appreciate all those updates. And then I know you sent out the reminders, but the chainsaw safety class coming up in June. It's always great if you have new people joining your municipal crews, or somebody that's doing it for a while, but maybe they haven't gone through all the best safety and maintenance practices. The Penn College of Technology session is June 3rd. You still have some openings?
We do, and the equipment operator training is in July. That's on, go ahead here, it's on the 25th. There's still openings on that one too. And that one is more capacity constrained to 10 people, but there are still some openings for that one too.
Great, excellent. Some of the nice hands-on stuff we like to do for LTAP. It's always great classroom wise, but when you can go out and actually use the equipment, yeah, even better. So thanks, Don, for those updates. Just any additional on the multimodal comments or review that you wanted to mention? I know I touched on that briefly, but those included in the packet, pages 33 to 35.
Sure. If anyone has any comments or changes they'd like to see, or any additional information that they'd like to have incorporated into that, as Steve mentioned, I believe it's due May 23rd, which is a Friday. So if you could get me any information by the end of next week, that'd be great, so that I can get this uploaded into the system and our comments officially logged into the PennDOT system.
Great, thank you. And most of those we've been connected to, seeing as former applications or other planning processes. So it's good to see those come in as applications to hopefully receive funding.
And I'm also reviewing the 3 applications from our region that came in from the C2P2 grant.
Steve, I have been asked to announce to the room that there are 2 pots of fresh coffee.
Hey, get your caffeine in there.
I share that with you as requested.
Good. Thanks for the update.
I just have a minor correction on this, on page 34, for the Vernon Borough First Avenue Bridge. It should say to the Borough of Vernon, not Township.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, it's like Bourbon Township. Great. And were they informing you, about that as they were preparing the application? Okay, thank you, Kristen. Next, kind of maybe every other meeting, we have an update on the strategic plan implementation items. So we try to keep tracking a pretty good laundry list there, as you can see, things that we're working on or touching or familiar with related to those different tasks and action strategies. Just in bold, we highlight a couple things for MPO board members. So like on page 39, under the strengthening local government partnership, sponsoring at least, one training workshop. We're always kind of responding to municipal interest and sharing about funding and opportunity, but we do have an interest in sponsoring, officially, some type of funding workshop or other training program. And if any of your counties, want to partner with us on that, PennDOT, other state agencies, feel free to let us know. Talk about the dates, venues, and what other types of programs you'd like to see covered. But it comes up regularly. Want to support municipalities and make them successful. So we're open to partnering on that. On page 40, bold, just we see a lot through all of these kind of training providers and associations. So we could share off some of the specific ones that come to us, but encourage members to get familiar with a lot happening in transportation. It's certainly legislative wise and the programs and also technology. But that's kind of our continual education piece of the strategic plan. And then the bottom, page 40, talks about some of the funding programs as well, and just to encourage that. Elsewhere, it's in there about the Safe Streets and Roads for All, but we know that's been a good, successful application process. We know things are going through, contractually with some of these, but that's a good program to consider. And certainly some of the state programs like multimodal and Arlie that we mentioned earlier, Greenlight Go, and the local share account and such. On page 41, toward the bottom, is the trainings. Again, just kind of hitting that, and if there's things you really want to see us bring to bear, let us know. Like Don touched on, we're trying to schedule guest presentations on various timely topics, such as the shared drive transportation phase 1 study here for today, Michelle, and the tip risk screening tool. So if there's other things that you want to see us schedule and arrange, you want to hear about as part of MPO meetings, and just feel free to let us know. We have that candidate list that we shared as the draft work program. And sometimes things change as tools or resources are being revised. And we look forward to having Pat in July. Focus Central PA was another one we had for transportation economic development, lined up probably for the summer months as well. So just let us know if there's an important topic or a guest presenter you want to have brought into these forums.
Steve, can I add a comment there? Fleming GFT is working with central office on developing a training program. Steve's been part of that committee. It is still in its early stages. What we're looking to assemble are existing training materials that can either be made available like a PDF, sort of look at yourself, prior presentations, but also live webinars and live in-person sessions in the future. We have 1 or 2 more meetings to go with that committee development by the end of June. I've been the person looking at sort of what's available, what's relevant today in 2025 that folks would need to know about. And our core audience is MPO and RPO staff, district planning and programming unit staff, and central office, primarily program center, but also some other parts of planning activities throughout central office. But the MPO board is certainly someone bodies that we have in view that might benefit, even if it's through Steve and Kristen's access to log into information, here's a webinar and such, or a resource you might want to see. I think there will be some materials, we're hoping to have them available for the latter half of 2025 and help the program setter stand up sort of a regular schedule of those. That might be something that comes into your packet in the future that you could say, hey, I'm interested in that, or can we see those resources? So as that comes further in its development, I think you might see some of those training options or things that are available to you as opposed to off the top of your head, what do you need to know more about? And that might spark some interest. So it's something in the works coming down the line. Maybe we'll come back and do a session on that in the future.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. Yeah, there's the pace of change and the amount of turnover and staff all across the board is exceptional anymore. So these kinds of offerings are going to be very good for the MPOs, the RPOs, the PennDOT staff, and then it will make sense as part of that process to plug into the MPO board. So thanks for being a part of that initiative. Training and equipping folks is paramount. Page 42, I just wanted to note at the bottom there, that other bold section, like multimodal trips and kind of project grand openings or celebrations or best practices. Feel free to float those by us as well. And I'll just highlight, I know the Greater Susquehanna Valley Chamber is on their transportation committee meeting this morning. Their July meeting is going to be more of a summit to get out and visit some recent projects and transportation improvement projects, or those that are in design or in the works. So those of you that are part of the Greater Susquehanna Valley, feel free to be on the lookout for that information as well. Maybe attend some of those, looking at highway, bridge, railroad, transit, aviation type projects. So that's always good to get out in the field and visit and tour different areas. And there's just things you want to have us maybe conduct, outside of an MPO meeting, or schedule an MPO meeting off this site and go to a county and maybe do a tour as part of an MPO meeting. Feel free to let us know. The rest of the items in this section are the typical kind of highway occupancy permit and the TA set aside status reporting. So any questions on any of those other items in the tip packet or the MPO meeting packet? Great. If not, then we're up to item G, and that's a presentation on the PennDOT Shared Ride Transportation Study Phase 1 report. In the packet, we have just the executive summary of this was included. If you're looking at it online or in the paper here in the room. And we were very fortunate to have Bureau Director for PennDOT's Public Transportation Bureau, Danielle Spila, provide this PowerPoint in advance and join us here today to give us background and talk about the next steps related to the study. So Danielle, if you're able to unmute and walk through it, I will bring up your PowerPoint as well.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, coming through clear. Thank
All
you.
right, excellent. So I'm going to try to muddle through this because I'm not very good at presenting online, but hopefully you'll bear with me. So, so we started this study a couple of years ago to look at kind of shared ride. Shared ride is a complicated program in some ways, and it's hard to explain to people. So we've been trying, one of the goals of this study was to break down exactly how it works in simple terms, and then identify some of the impending issues that we have, that we see coming along. So go ahead to the next slide. Sorry, I don't know why I'm coughing all of a sudden. So what is shared ride? I always like to say that shared ride is our original on-demand microtransit service, right? We've been doing this for 40 years in Pennsylvania. And every single county has access to shared ride. And it's funded through a variety of different funding sources. If you want to flip to the next slide. And the passengers, it's open to anyone in the general public, but typically the passengers are subsidized by some of our state programs. And so the passengers are typically seniors, people with disabilities, and low income, recipients of medical assistance. It is a safety net service. It is for folks that really have no other option for transportation. And we have about 5 million passenger trips per year in Pennsylvania provided by this service. You want to switch to the next slide? While you do that, I'm going to get a drink of water really quick.
Yep, take whatever time you need. And this PowerPoint, for those of you online, was included in that master kind of PDF package that we post on our website. So you're able to follow along that way as well. And hopefully the share screen is working well for everybody.
Yep, it is, Steve. And I guess I have a question because I know in the past meetings we had a discussion about the funding on this. So could you just give an update as to what you're aware of with the funding on this and the path forward?
Sure, that would be included. I think some of the different recommendations. As we know, there's a big shortfall for the shared ride transportation system across the state. And the steering committee or working group proposed some different alternatives for addressing that. Certainly the major systems in Philadelphia, SEPTA, Port Authority, out in Allegheny County, Pittsburgh area, but all the shared ride systems are dealing with major issues here. So that'll be touched on. If you're asking about the stop hopper service within our region in particular, I think the local match has come together that for at least 1 year and some for beyond that level. So that's where it's a required 15% local match for that micro transit service. And there's been some expansions of the zones, and those can kind of be considered, strategically where there wants to be new service offered, and the existing micro transit zones as well. So, but on statewide kind of shared ride, the call ahead on demand service, that's going to be touched on here in Danielle's PowerPoint.
Okay, so hopefully I'm back and I can talk. I'm really sorry. So we studied kind of to tag on to that. We know that we have an issue with shared ride in Pennsylvania relative to funding. And so we were wanting to conduct a study to identify some different funding options because this program hasn't changed in 40 years in terms of how it's funded. And obviously things have changed a little. Obviously things have changed over the last 40 years in terms of the distances people travel, all different kinds of things. And so the study really looked at the history of shared ride. It looked at other states and what they do. I will say that Pennsylvania's program is pretty unique. We are really a coordinated transit system for human service transportation like no other state in the country. And it's really because of the foresight 40 years ago to build this system. So throughout the study, we've identified 4 funding models and looked at some of their strengths and weaknesses. And, you know, we've not identified a specific approach. Probably the approach is going to be a blending of different elements of many of these models. You want to go flip to the next slide. So when we talk about this, we want a sustainable system. And what do we mean by that? Well, we mean that the funding will achieve that we're not riding at deficits, that we've effectively we're effectively serving customers of where they need to go, and that the service delivery that they can provide reliable and cost-effective transportation. And I think that's a key piece, is that this is public transportation and it is a safety net program. It is not going to solve everyone's transportation problem. And so I think that's where you know, we have a real challenge before us. If you want to switch to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about what's the problem with the way it's funded today. So I like to break things down to basic, you know, almost like I'm talking to my teenagers, right? So as with everything, you have expenses and you have the revenues that cover the expenses. So, you know, in order for shared rides to be financially sustainable, those revenues must equal those expenses. We're going to go to the next slide. So when we look on the revenue side, where do we get our revenues? So providers establish a fare structure based on their expenses. And the way the program works today, that fare structure is supposed to be based on the expenses. It is not, and we can explain a little bit more about that later. In Pennsylvania, if you're a senior citizen, if you're a person with a disability, the state covers 85% of that trip fare, and then the passenger pays 15%. And then there are other programs that utilize that service, and there's different funding models for how they do that. When we look at expenses, you know, there's kind of 2 ways to break down expenses when you're talking about this program. You have fixed cost, things that regardless of the number of trips provided, you're going to be paying that. So administration, marketing, insurance, vehicle costs. And then you have variable costs that could be, you're not going to pay them necessarily unless you actually provide a trip. And so some examples of that might be fuel, potentially driver wages, depending on how you're organized. And there's some other things that go into that, but those are the big ones. So if you want to flip to the next slide. So what we've seen and what we experienced during COVID is that we had a dip in ridership, right? And so the transit agencies base their budgets on what they project to be ridership. And when you have a dip in ridership, you lose revenues. So the scale tips. Your per trip costs decrease because maybe you're not riding fuel, maybe you put your drivers on layoff, but you still have your fixed costs. So you still have a pretty significant expense. And so in the case where you have a dip in ridership, we have an imbalanced scale. Let's flow to the next one. And then what happens if you have a big increase in expenses, operating costs? So why might your expenses increase? And we're seeing this everywhere, right? It's not just in shared ride, it's in everywhere we look today, right? So on the shared ride program specifically, inflation has driven up our costs. The consolidation of healthcare facilities in rural areas, and I'm sure you deal with that in your MPO, they result in much longer trips, and so those trips are more expensive to provide. And then, if you're taking those longer trips, you're not necessarily going all to the same place, so you have fewer passengers per vehicle, and that means they can't really split the cost of the trip the way they might have in the past. And we have not been able to successfully automate some of the trip scheduling and customer service, although we are working on that at PennDOT, and you'll start to see that being rolled out. So again, the equation's knocked out of balance when you have an increase in expenses. So if you want to flip to the next slide. So for the past couple of years, we've been taking some temporary measures by trying to help balance the scale by providing emergency funding, both state and federal funding, to increase those revenues to the transit agencies to be able to keep that scale in balance. That money is nearly gone, as you're going to hear everywhere, right? I mean, you guys are feeling it locally too. You've had COVID relief money that you've probably spent, and now, that's a hole in your budgets that you're going to have to solve. So if you want to flip to the next slide. So, people say, well, why don't you just raise revenues, or why don't you just raise fares, or why don't you just cut your costs? What happens is that fewer people can afford to take the shared ride, and it doesn't meet their needs or their destinations. So that means fewer trips, which means less revenue, which means your ridership is gutted and your cost per trip becomes completely unsustainable. So we call this our downward spiral. And at the end of the day, the folks that are most vulnerable are the ones that are impacted. And if you want to flip to the next slide, here's another way that we kind of talk about it a little bit. So say it costs $200 to operate a shared ride van from the senior living center to the closest medical complex. When you have 4 riders, their trip is $50 per trip, and their copay is at 15% or $750. When you only have 2 riders, that cost, while the cost per trip is the cost to operate the shuttle stays the same, you have 2 riders splitting that for $100, and then their copays would go up $15 to $15. And now we have 1 rider, and that's $200 for that trip, and the copay is now $30 for them. So, the point of this is that we want to try and maximize the number of riders on the trips because we are running public transportation. And we want to make sure that increase per trip cost doesn't get to an unsustainable point. So it's just a different way to look at kind of what we're dealing with. If you want to go ahead, Ben. So today, go ahead to the next slide. Today, we pay for trips. That's the model. So basically, the revenue is only gained when a transit agency actually provides a trip. So during COVID, when they were not providing as many trips, they still had expenses, but they weren't getting any revenue. So they had big deficits. And they basically try to set a fare structure to balance their projected costs. And again, they are not always, just taking the total expenses provided by the projected trips, because then, they get into that downward spiral. If they raise the fares too much, that people can no longer afford the copay, and they start to see a decrease in ridership. So it's kind of the struggle that we go through. So on the next couple of slides, and I'm not going to go through every single point on these slides. I think they're important, and you can probably get access to them in the meeting materials. But basically what we did in the study is to kind of look at different perspectives on the different models. So this first model, we were talking about capping the out-of-pocket copayment. So potentially using our revenues or subsidies and capping the out-of-pocket copayment so that you don't have riders choosing not to ride because they can't afford the copay anymore. And so at the bottom of each of these slides, you'll see the perspective from the funding partner, how that operates, from the service provider, from the customers, what's the impact to them, and then, you know, what are some of the challenges we have from an institutional perspective, or do we need technical or legislative changes? I'll say that most of this program is in legislation, and so we would need legislative changes to be able to make any changes to the program, unless we can figure out a way to do some kind of pilot, and that's kind of what our goal is. So model 2 is really, you know, looking at that variable and fixed cost, and if there's a way we could get some kind of dedicated funding, which is really the same way that we run fixed route. They get dedicated funding, they know what they're going to get every year, and so if we could get some kind of dedicated funding that would cover those fixed costs, and then maybe the fare revenue is based on the 85-15 of just the variable costs, which would then allow passengers to pay a little bit less, and you know, not have that downward spiral in terms of the entire program. Want to go to the next one? And again, these models were really just how could we fund them? How are some different ways we could fund this? So, you know, this is a pay for service approach where the state would have funding dedicated based on some service characteristics, vehicle miles, vehicle hours. We'd have a pot of funding and we'd divide it up regionally depending on how many hours or miles, which is similar to what we do with the fixed route program. And then the providers would have the freedom to set fares and arrange with third-party subsidies or other funding streams. So say you wanted to locally fund low-income folks to be able to get to work, you know, you at the local level could additionally provide that, or, you know, they could come up with a foundation or something else to be able to do that, so that you're literally paying to provide the service to your constituents. You want to go to the next one? And the next one is kind of the same thing. It's just using a different mechanism to fund the subsidy. So this one, you know, we said you could potentially distribute funding based on some population characteristics, the number of seniors in your community, the number of people with disabilities, and again, the same thing. You could, the transit agencies then could go out and secure other funding for other passengers. Because while the service is open to the public, I think the average fare right now is like $25 or $30 for a trip. And generally folks in the community don't have the funding to be able to do that on a, you know, on a recurring basis. Maybe they could use it as an emergency trip, but generally that's not something that they're able to do. If you want to go to the next slide. So currently the shared ride funding sources are lottery funds. We know lottery funds are really tight. Medical assistance is a big part of our funding. Again, we don't really know what's going to be happening with that nationally. So the impacts on some of these other programs haven't really been identified in this study. We have included DHS in the study materials, but really this program is really focused, or this study is really focused on the shared ride piece that we're operating. So on the medical assistance side, it kind of varies across the state. Some medical assistance trips are provided by the transit agencies, and medical assistance may pay 15% if they're using the publicly available service. You know, the lottery will pay the 85% and the medical assistance pays the 15% copay, because if you're on medical assistance, that's one of the things that you get is the free transportation to your medical appointments. And then, but again, sometimes the rules around medical assistance require the transit agencies to run a little bit of different service. So there might be a different funding model associated with some of those trips. So that's where it gets really complicated when you start to go into the other agencies and how things all are worked. So you want to go to the next slide? So this is just a list of some of the relevant legislation that is included in our shared ride program. Go ahead, next slide. Again, this is just showing, what we would need to change legislatively for each of the models. So you can flip through these pretty quickly because there's another slide I want to show. Go ahead. Keep going. One more. Oh, all right. So the next step, I guess, I don't know if I have this slide in here because we have one presentation with it in here or not. But basically last year, the deficit statewide in the shared ride program was $72 million. So we had a cost recovery of about 64% of the expenses. So basically what that means is that agencies that operate fixed route transportation and shared ride, they were taking some of their fixed route dollars and subsidizing shared ride. Other agencies that only have shared ride service, we were trying to help them with our federal and state monies, or maybe they got some additional local money to help meet the budget. And so, we have a hole of 72 million today, and I don't anticipate that hole is going to be filled quickly by anything that we can do from a program perspective. So basically, from the study, the status quo is unsustainable. Any solution, we have to balance the needs and the limitations of our customers, the transit agencies, and the funding partners. The best shared ride funding solution will likely be a hybrid of two or more of the alternatives presented, or maybe there's something else. The legislation, regulations, policies, oversight, we need to update them to reflect any new funding models. And so one of the things that we're doing is in Act 44 or Act 89, I can't remember which one, there was a shared ride pilot advisory committee established. And so we're working to reestablish that advisory committee. So potentially we could look at some different pilot models and see if we could do something within the current structure to select a model and maybe even test it out in some way. I'm going to go to the next slide. So I kind of did that. So again, we need to do more detailed analysis. We want to work with the Shared Ride Pilot Committee to engage stakeholders. And the representatives of that pilot committee include legislative selections, transit agency, consumers, and other state agencies. So it's a broad representation. That was what was in the legislation. And then if we have, if we come up with something, we'd have to propose program updates to a bunch of different places. I think that might be the last slide. Yeah, so I'm happy to take any questions. You in the SEDA COG area, since you have so many different transit agencies, you probably have a multitude of different ways it's being run.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that information and sharing it today, Danielle. Critical needs and gaps to be met. We're glad to be a part of that conversation with our transit operators and the planning process, but I know there's different things working through the General Assembly. The governor's obviously proposed some of his transit investments, and thanks for all the analysis that you pulled together. I think that helps those of us that kind of know a little bit, but not the full picture. And so that's very helpful. Yeah, clarifying.
Yeah, it gets really complicated really quickly.
Any folks, members of MPO in here online, or any of our transit operators have questions for Danielle?
Danielle, is there an estimated figure of what it would cost annually to provide that across the state?
Provide what?
The shared ride at a 5% or less capped fare.
Well, so right now, the total operating cost for shared ride across the state's around 200 million. And so basically, we're funding 65% of that with existing funding and revenue. And so the 72 million, and that would be, so here's the problem with shared ride is that, and maybe it's the problem with everything, right? There's never enough. People want more than what we are able to provide. And so I guess it depends on what is the level of service people are expecting as to what those costs are. So, we would need an additional 72 million to be able to run the service without a deficit today. Does
So
that make
that's
sense?
one week's worth of lottery tickets. I mean, the lottery was supposed to be set up so that it would assist our seniors, our people with disabilities. And we're giving away 65 to 100 million every 2 or 3 weeks. And we're still funding 65%. But I'm kind of lost in the figures as to how come we're still charging them when supposedly this was set up to take care of them. It's just a personal problem I have.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think that's part of the problem with the program. The way the program is structured now, you have to charge a fare and the lottery covers 85% of that fare. That is in legislation. So as we raise fares, then, if it's kind of the same thing, $50 fare versus $100 fare. The out-of-pocket expense for a senior might be $15 versus $30, right? So I think that's part of the problem is the way the program was structured. And again, when the program was structured 40 years ago, it was really in a community, getting people to and from. The trips were not that expensive. You might have had 15, 20 people, maybe not that many, maybe 7 or 8 go into the senior center. They all lived in the neighborhood. But now it's definitely broadened, and where people are going and where they need to go is a lot different, and it costs more to provide that transportation.
I understand. I just don't like it.
Yeah, I know.
Well, Danielle, I work for Rabbit Transit, and I've been in transportation now 35 years. And what I've seen is, as you said, the distance people are traveling.
Yeah.
Just the other day, we had to go to Philadelphia to pick somebody up being released from the hospital.
Yeah.
So, that is our biggest challenge right now is these long distance trips. And you have, as you said, one person on that bus. And we've taken that driver out of the area for almost 7 hours to pick up one person, which then we're paying overtime to another driver to stay out to do trips now that our one driver in Philadelphia cannot do. So it's a vicious cycle. And I understand the need for folks to travel longer distances for medical appointments, but then we're running into people wanting to go to, they live in Selinsgrove and they want to go to Sam's Club in Wilkesboro. I mean, it's a challenge. That right now is our biggest challenge is the distance.
Yeah, and I will say, from our perspective, the transit agencies do a wonderful job of coordinating and trying to get the best service out there. I know that it is really hard to do and it is not perfect, but it's really hard to do this service. And, I'll just say Michelle, the drivers, they are amazing. Because they're not just driving a bus. They are doing a lot more than just driving someone to an appointment.
Correct. They are social workers. They are not a driver. They are social workers every day because they're doing that face-to-face with those folks. And some of them are very appreciative and some of them are just angry, which I get. Right.
Yeah.
So you're not just driving a bus.
Yeah.
And people do not understand that. So, but thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it.
Sure. So we're always open to questions. The report, if you want it, is on our website. I'll also do another plug. We also have an annual report every year that we put out, and I haven't sent the notice yet to the MPOs, but it is on our website today, and that really looks at, so the report this year has a section on the decade of investment, so what we've done over the past 10 years with capital funds that the legislature generously gave transit agencies. So you're gonna, a lot of it was spent on vehicles and facility upgrades. So I know in Milton, they're getting ready to do a facility upgrade there. So there's a section in there on that. There's also a section in how we spend our federal funds, which I think is really interesting. We don't take any of them at PennDOT for administrative. They all go out to transit agencies. Most of them are rural funds. So we use it to subsidize operations and also to build capital facilities and buy buses. And then in the annual report is also an agency by agency snapshot of some of their general statistics. So you can look at trends, you can see, what's their passengers look like. Anyone that runs shared ride, you can really see where they're running deficit, who has the most deficits, because you can see what is their expenses versus what is their revenue in those programs. So, if you're interested, please take a look at that report as well.
Danielle, this is Michelle Brummer. Can you tell me if your current analysis or your future detail analysis is or will look at like the aging trend in population and for like the differences between urban and rural and sort of longer term social dynamic patterns, like more active seniors who might have, more independent, want to drive myself versus are there health decline trends that would make people more reliant and interested in shared ride? Are any of those the factors you have looked at or will look at?
Well, so we've been involved with the master plan on aging, and we've got some couple of follow-ups relative to that. We're always looking at that data. What we've found is that typically people are driving longer when they come to shared ride. And Michelle, you may be able to back this up. When they come to use shared ride, they're usually more frail and they might need more attention. And so, obviously with the aging population, we hope that people will use the service. But again, if we have to cut service to be able to meet budgets, it may not be available to people to be able to do what they want to do.
Danielle, you made a good point that people are more frail now that are using our service. We have a much larger dialysis community that we're serving. That seems to be one of our major types of service we do now is to dialysis centers, or Geisinger, Danville, Wellspan, and Lewisburg. They're not the recreational trips that we used to do that were the local grocery store to the hairdresser. It's those major medical appointments for the elderly who are not in a good health condition, if you will.
Maybe it's been done through other studies, assessments, or hearings, but Danielle, has there been any kind of cost assignment if the gap's not made up here or services further reduced in terms of the larger socioeconomic costs associated with that? If this problem is not addressed?
We haven't looked at it like that, but I am starting to think a little bit about trying to figure out what happens next, because not to be gloom and doom, but I kind of see costs going up. Our funding isn't going up to cover the cost. Like a bus has, increased by 50% in the past 5 years. Our funding hasn't increased by that. So we're going to be able to buy less buses, maybe have less for operating. So yeah, I think that there's probably some analysis we could do around, what is the economic cost of not having the system in place? And obviously in rural communities, I always say there's trade-offs, right? When you live in a rural community, you're going to have to go farther to the grocery store. You're going to have to go further to, the doctor's office. And so that's a trade-off you're making. And, I just don't know that public transportation is going to be able to fill that need the way it is today, unless we figure something else out.
Thank you. ton of information
These are
there.
not, I always say the easy problems are already solved, so now we're left with the hard ones.
Yeah. Any other questions from the room or online for Danielle about the shared ride study? If not, we really value your time and thanks for highlighting this report. I know Jeff usually gives us a lot of updates on this and what's working through the General Assembly, Jeff Eisman as well, and all the advocacy that's going on at Transit for All and the rallies and such. So we'll continue to monitor that. And any closing remarks then, Danielle?
Nope. I think shared ride is an important issue that we've identified. Obviously, fixed route as well, but shared ride is definitely the system that's out there in all of our communities. You see those buses providing a critical service to people with disabilities and seniors and people on medical assistance. I hate to see it. I hate to see it go away because I do think it's a critical service in our communities. So please feel free to reach out if you have questions following this meeting, and also talk to your local transit providers and ask them questions about how they're doing, because I think they'll be honest with you and some of the struggles.
Thanks again so much for your time, Danielle. Feel free to stay on if you want, but you're certainly free to dismiss yourself as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'll stop sharing there and we'll go ahead and bring up Michelle's PowerPoint you had emailed to me to cover item H, the pre-tip risk screening tool. So let me swap out my screen sharing. And I guess this one. Look familiar? Yeah. It's loading. Good. Thinking. Maybe I have to hit another button here. It had asked me about editing this, enable editing. So let me hit that and see if it likes that better. You're not a security risk, I don't think, Michelle, but
I try not to be.
that.
I get scanned regularly at traffic buildings.
Okay, that looks better.
Yes.
All right with that, enable editing.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, that's what we're all plan. So thanks for inviting me to be here for this, Steve. So risk screening is a new component of PennDOT's risk management policy. The policy has been updated. FHWA has approved it, and central office is kind of culling together a couple of other updates to DM1X that they will roll out, distribute, transmit at one time. So this isn't live yet, but it's coming, and we're actually in the process of scoping a work order to support some of its rollout and implementation. This is the risk screening is not an activity we're going to ask the MPO board to do, but we think it will benefit you, and I think that's why Steve thought it might be useful. The intent here is to get a sharper pencil on project costs and schedules as the projects are being added to the TIP, so that there are fewer amendments and fewer administrative adjustments down the line to help streamline the decisions you have to make in the future. And hopefully then also keep the program and the project list sort of rolling through more smoothly with fewer delays to things that are waiting in the pipeline for programming and funding. So a quick definition of risk: anything uncertain, condition, or event, which if it happens is going to have an impact. So we look at risk in terms of the probability of a condition or event that's going to happen, and then what's the magnitude of its impact. Those are the two sort of big factors we look at. The risk management policies reminds us that a risk is something we don't know if it's going to happen. An issue is something we're facing right now, and we need to get a response or a reaction together. So it's a little bit of a definition to distinguish those two, because we don't know everything about risks in terms of their probability isn't always 100% and the magnitude isn't always measured. Thinking about risk before something happens is a proactive activity, and issue management then is reactive. Next slide. I mentioned there is already a risk management policy. It sits at the back of DM1X as Appendix AH. There are many double-lettered appendices after the single-lettered appendices. It was originally adopted in 2015, 2016, again, to reduce cost overruns, time overruns for things that should have been able to be thought about ahead of time. At least that's what the folks who put this policy in place thought. That policy set up a tool called a risk register. It's an Excel file that gives the district, mostly the MPOs probably get a chance to look at it when it's used, a chance to look at risk at a very cursory level or a much more detailed level, depending on the complexity of the project. They have, I'm told, the risk register has had some uneven use since the policy was adopted and rolled out. We think this risk screening will be an aid, both in the short term to better programming, but also in encouraging greater use of the risk register in the more complex projects, at least. So that's then why this was developed. Next. I talked about probability and magnitude of impact. So the Rumsfeld matrix comes into play in terms of creating this 2x2 matrix of probability and magnitude of impact. The things we know, yeah, we know exactly what's going to happen in terms of a transportation project. Maybe we know exactly how many miles of pavement we're going to need to replace, how wide that pavement is. Those are things that we know and we can quantify. On the far, on the bottom right, the unknown unknowns. We didn't know that a hurricane was going to come through the area because we programmed these dollars and set this schedule, 5 years before the present tense of construction or something that might have put in a delay. Those are the extremes of things that are certain and things that are completely out of our control and unreasonable to predict. There's two red categories. They get in their terminology a little bit. The known unknowns, we know that something will be needed or some condition will happen. We just don't know quite how much or how it will impact us. And then there's the maybe something will happen and we aren't quite kind of afraid maybe to put a measure on it. Rumsfeld talked about this in one of his, I think, congressional hearings or something, and this sort of range of options became known as the Rumsfeld matrix. That presents it in the abstract. Let's apply it to a transportation project in terms of a timeline. Across the top are the phases of a project. On the left-hand side, we have our four items from the Rumsfeld matrix. The known knowns at the bottom, the things we know about the project, generally what kind it is, what scale it is, what basic kinds of materials we're going to need. That all goes into a base project estimate and timeline. We've replaced pavement before. We've replaced a bridge of this size before. We have a good handle on that, and may even have some local context in one district versus another where the geography is different, the topography, the drainage, et cetera. So some of that localized knowledge helps make that base cost estimate and schedule, reasonably certain, and it gets more certain the later phases through the project that we go. There's things we know are going to happen. We can't put a quantity on it yet. We call those allowances, and we add some additional dollars and some additional cost to that additional initial information we put together as the project is prepared for the tip. The unknown knowns, not quite sure here, but maybe we ought to have some dollars in case something happens. Call that contingency. But what's not there are the unknown unknowns. There's delays from a hurricane, or we found something in geology that makes the foundation significantly different. So all at least those top three categories, this risk screening is meant to say, can we make that pencil any sharper so that there are fewer tip amendments, less schedule impacts on future projects. And that's what I believe it was titled Highway Administration when this project got started a couple years ago, what they were trying to retrieve. Can we get a more reliable, more predictable, more accurate, we can stick to it kind of cost estimate and project schedule at the time of the tip approval. Next slide. So risk screening is our terminology for this. I'll give you a couple of highlights here about what the activity is, what the tool is that's been developed, who and how uses it, and when it happens. Next. So our tool is essentially a checklist. It sits as its own tab in the risk register, so we've not created a separate tool, but something that provides a relatively high-level checklist, literally. Let's think about this one more time before we say this project and its cost estimate and schedule are ready to go on to the draft tip. We worked with a number of MP and RPO representatives, district planning and programming representatives, some subject matter experts from central office, and asked, what are the kinds of things that happen in the planning and programming process that maybe lead to uncertainty? Are there risks that are pretty common, or categories, types of risks that are common across all or most projects? Are there things specific to multimodal components that you're going to come across? And then some really specialty as applicable. So created these 4 buckets, and then anywhere from 3 to like 8 or 9 specific risks under each one. And the idea of this checklist is to, in a working team, and I'll tell you about those members in just a moment, have we sufficiently thought about the planning process and how we got here? Do we know of any stakeholders, political officials who might have a particular sentiment, and we need to account for that in, we ought to raise the level on public involvement or extra municipal coordination that's needed because of what we know today. Now caught with Daniel, so being out of breath and hydration. So those are some process risks. I'm going to turn so I can read better. Under our common risks, we have things like right-of-way, utilities. Those are going to, as a planning and programming unit, come across fairly often. I need a water. Right back. Chat amongst yourselves.
For maybe the districts, but if you're still hearing as well, Michelle, takes a quick break. Kind of the cost driver analysis. I guess that's kind of similar, I would think, to this screening tool or how it's applied. Is that somewhat accurate?
I would agree with that, Steve. This is Mark. This has been a great tool. It is a great tool to look at and examine for those costs and estimating interests. And so much of our estimating does come back to the knowns or comparisons to other known projects.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Thank you. They're multimodal. We have non-motorized public transit as a consideration. Thank you. And freight, whether that be rail or trucking, kinds of considerations. As applicable kinds of risks. Sorry, this is tiny. Hopefully, if you're on your own screen, you're blowing this up even further. Things like major structures. We have railroad crossings again here, ITS. Lighting, and I want to say lighting was something that was brought up by one of our central office interviews. And I think it might have been, I might be shooting myself in the foot here, the CSVT bridge, that they hadn't thought about lighting early enough in the project. And they ended up going, okay, we need to how does that lighting need to work on that bridge? from an aviation protection standpoint and so forth. So there's an example of something that happens on occasion, particularly an elevated bridge, but not every project has lighting, and that's why it gets grouped there. Let's work through the sort of checklist process so you get a highlight of that. The next slide. This screening tool or the risk register itself is meant to be initiated when a project is going to be added to the tip, sort of that's developing. The project team is getting near the end of their process where they've got their numbers coming together, they've got an estimate for schedule, and this is meant to be the final check, TSA pre-check, whatever you want to call that, to say, has our pencil been sharp enough? And do we need to double check anything before we feel really confident that we'll be able to stick with this cost and schedule? So the top lines are like what project, is there known NPS number, et cetera. And then the team is meant to briefly discuss in a meeting. And our pilot sessions, these meetings lasted 15 to 20 minutes after some initial instruction. 15 to 20 minutes per project. So which of these risks is applicable? Maybe there's 2 or 3. Maybe there are 5 to 10. It's going to vary project to project. They're not going to all be applicable to every project. But which are those that we need to give pause? Did we think about this? Have we accounted for enough contingency? Do we need any more, either the cost or the time? So if the risk is applicable, then you work across the list and say, have we accounted for it fully? Are there any publications or stakeholders or maybe somebody who's had the unique experience with this kind of project setting before that can give us a better handle on what we might face? And if so, is there any sort of action to follow up with that person or check against a publication kind of thing? That's item 5. The final column is kind of for notes that would be for the project team later in the process. Maybe there's some things you anticipate are going to happen. Hey, the community is, we know they're coming up on their 250th celebration and they're planning for some big parade and events. We don't, maybe those dates are known, maybe we just know it's summer of such and such. There may be notes that would be relevant for the project team later, in later phases, EE or construction, et cetera. But that at the tip time are really particularly relevant, or you don't need that kind of specificity. So we provided some space for that. 15, 20 minutes later, this activity might be done and you can mark it complete on the same date, or the project team can. If there's some follow-up time, maybe that's a little bit later. The who's involved here. The risk management policy talks about a risk management project team as kind of a subset of a bigger project team. Not all of these folks are going to be known at the time of sort of getting the project ready for the tip. We think there's sort of a minimum set of participants for the risk screening, being the planning partner who has maybe the best understanding of what's going on in the community on the ground and what their expectations might be, just to have those represented at the table. The district planner, who also may have had some of those conversations, it's on the inside of the district. The planning and programming manager's got, a wealth of experience in terms of cost estimating and so forth. And, a project manager. There may or may not be a project manager at the time, pre-tip, before something happens. But if it's a bridge project, who might have good experience to help this group sort of work through? Are our numbers good? So that could be a representative project manager. Next. When does this happen? This is a diagram that sits in the PennDOT's DM1A publication that talks about overall the timeline for a project from when it's identified as an issue on the left to when it gets delivered on the right. And the tip sort of timeline is, I point to it at the red box, it's right bar. So your project addition to the tip or the STIP is this little chevron symbol here. So your risk register activity is most likely and most beneficial here to the right side of that, right before it's added to the tip. there may be some discussions that can start earlier, and hopefully if you anticipate that risk screening activities coming, the folks on the project team are thinking about that even earlier. Once the project is added to the tip, the risk management kind of is on hold until PE begins. And then that more bigger project team, more folks at the district, would open up that risk register file, review the results, and start working through the more detailed risk analysis that's been in place since 2015. We are envisioning that this would be rolled out and ready for the 2027 TIP development and would apply to projects you're adding to the TIP at that time. We can flip through these relatively quickly. We did a pilot with HATS and District 8. This was a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. And we ran it like this. We prepared a sort of quick project description. It had an MPMS number. We provided sort of an aerial image to give us all sort of the where is this located, what's going on around it kind of a thing. Some project information down the left-hand side. So we're all in the place. We know what we're talking about. We went to the risk screening tool on the next slide and said, of these, programming was a risk that, yeah, we ought to make sure we got that right. Political support, we should make sure we had good consideration there, right of way, utilities, and railroads, because there's a railroad bridge for this culvert that was in the lower left-hand corner of the aerial image. And we worked across with our notes about did the team feel that particular risk factor had been considered in the preparation. This is really district staff saying yes in in these cases, and maybe the MPO partner saying, here's a unique aspect of this project, or we know or we don't know this that you'll need to face and address later on in the project. They ended up saying these things were fairly well addressed, and they made a couple of notes in the right-hand column to share with the project team down the line. We don't need to dig deeper in this one. I'll just point out a different example. This one was for the Route 11 bridge over the Juniata River in Duncannon. And here we had added a note that we heard in advance of our screening meeting that there was a big warehouse development that was proposed. I don't know the current status of this. This is dated information. But because it was future, it would contribute to the trucking traffic information that might not sit in the historic record right now. So there is a railroad in the vicinity here. We've got the river itself, plus the highway components and the interchange. So those were all sort of, at least keep that in the awareness of things that could go right, go really well, or might go wrong, or just be out of our control in this particular project. Next slide. We worked through this risk screening checklist. You can see that there are more items that we revisited as short discussion points. It might have been 2 minutes, it might have been a 3 or 4 minute conversation, but there was a record that it was talked about, and whether there was any need for follow-up action and guidance for any future phases in the project. And that was, again, closed in about 15 minutes total. Next. We asked our pilot participants, was this easy to use? They said yes. The instruction was simple. There is a tab that gives kind of reference prompts and definitions in the risk register. We thought that was worth going over in the first time work session, but not something folks would need to look up and refer to all the time. But maybe as new people come in, you might revisit that. But that is baked into the same Excel file. Reasonable range of risk types, yes. They thought it might be particularly useful for local owner or local sponsor kinds of projects who aren't maybe as familiar with the complexities of a local bridge or something like that. So being able to walk through this list with them helps bring things to light that might not otherwise have been known. The time effort, like I said, was about 15 to 20 minutes per project after our introductory instruction. And it really lands on the planning partner and the district MSC's shoulders to do this work. I said, with a big benefit, hopefully, for MPOs and fewer administrative actions down the line. But that's really where the value lies. And we think it can be integrated with the tip development cycle so that those things happen in the last months of tip development, so that there's greater confidence that those costs and schedules can hold. This is where we're at now. That revised policy is to be issued. I don't have a date for that. I don't know the details of the other updates that central office is working on to sort of compile in a single release. And we are working on scoping a rollout webinar. We've done some things with the bi-monthly planning partner meetings to give mini updates and so forth. But we anticipate doing some workshops where, in this case, we would have a workshop with Steve and Kristen or whoever from the MPO would participate in District 2. And we'd get a couple of sample projects. What would be a typical project and what might be a more complex project in your region. To work through some examples, and then another workshop with District 3 and your MPO staff. I'm hoping to do those later this year so that you're familiar and have been through that process and can apply that to new projects, new major projects. Maybe those criteria will be a little better defined, but things headed for the 2027 tip. Contact information here. Brian Shunk was originally the lead for this, and he has now relocated to Florida. I hear that Jeff Booker is retiring. So Ryan Schiffler will be our new lead on this. Jeff is still at central office at present, and Keith Chase and I have been working on this the past 2 years. So should you have questions for any of us, you're welcome to contact us.
Did you see the screening tab checklist tool residing on some kind of server, or how's that?
Yeah, that'll be CMS SharePoint site, something or other. We're the toolbox of other tools that these folks typically need to access. And the file has been updated. I don't know that it's been uploaded yet since the policy hasn't been re-released, but it will be available there.
Any other questions in the room or online for Michelle about this new risk screening tool and how it'll be applied?
Steve, Mark Schultz, Michelle, good presentation. It is a very helpful tool. I look forward to that being expanded. Just wanted to note that I don't know that it will be used on every project that is going to be added to the tip. There are some general projects that will not require that effort, which then cuts down on the time invested as well.
Sure. Maybe there's a cost threshold, projects of a certain size, or some sort of qualitative measure of, we do this all the time. This is a very routine project versus this one has any sort of distinction that makes it worth an extra 15, 20 minutes of investment. Agreed, Mark.
Anything additional? Thanks for going through that, Michelle, and joining us. Thanks for working through the spread of Danielle's.
Apologies to whoever has to talk next. I didn't accept the water bottle.
It's yours if you want.
Thank you.
Great. Next is our long-range transportation plan update from Kristen. Brian Funkhauser cannot be with us today. So she'll handle that. I'll bring up the PowerPoint if you want to run through the slides here. I transfer over the share screen. Too many windows up in there. There it is. Squirrel link. Waiting. So this one was in the advanced material, so you should have that way to follow along, but let's try it again for the share button. All right, looks better. Okay.
Okay, so obviously we're in the middle of our long range transportation plan update. Probably a year from now, we'll be wrapping it up with public meetings and adoption. So we're about at the halfway point, I would say. So we'll just go over some of the steps that we've been taking in the last MPO meeting. So I'm going to go to the next step. The STC survey is the first point on that. That closed on the 30th. So I guess that's about 2 weeks ago at this point. We anticipate that data we should have access to that in this month, hopefully, probably by early June, the absolute latest. We are moving with the draft existing condition profiles, and that should be completed in the next month to 6 weeks. And then by the end of September, we would have the draft LRTP material out to the steering committee for their review, and then in anticipation of sending that to FTA, or I'm sorry, FHWA and FTA, our federal partners, probably October, November timeframe. And then one of the other actions is we've been working with Michael Baker, obviously, but to do a freight analysis framework, the FAF5. Some of that experimental data will be updated in May. That's the database of the freight flows, and that annual estimate is going to be available pretty soon. And that will include the inflow outflow data from the region by commodity and by mode type, and identify the top counties that import and export goods. We're also, mapping efforts with highlight the roadway segments by tonnage and by commodity. And then also looking at doing some technical analysis with INRIX on congestion areas, travel time index, and hotspots. And then also we had our last steering committee meeting, beginning of April, where we went over the draft action strategies, and those are now the comments that were received from the steering committee and by staff are now being integrated into that. One of the things that Michael Baker has been working on very intently is updating the functional classification information. And what we're going to be looking at eventually is that there are some there's some upgrades recommended and some downgrades recommended. The upgrades, there's approximately 140 miles in the region of upgrades, and downgrades would be about 40 miles. And once we have some draft recommendations from Michael Baker, we'll be meeting with each county member and PennDOT to review those. See what we want to do about those. And project prioritization obviously is a big component of this, which looks at the later years of the TIP. And we're in the process of developing the scoring criteria. We do have a list of what that criteria will be, but we have not assigned a weight to it yet. And then we're also requesting the information of bands and bands from central office. Then next steps will be continue and finalize the background profile. As I mentioned, the functional classifications, and we'll be meeting with each county to discuss those. The revenue forecast, and we're doing the STC results, and then we're looking to have that next steering committee meeting on October 8th, so that we will have the draft plan out then prior to that for their comment. So that's overview. I don't know if anyone has any questions on what we're up to. All right, thank you.
Kristen. We're on to Dawn's NEVI and the community charging update then, and those materials are in your packets there on page 52.
Okay, briefly, just to review, the NEVI program is a federally sponsored program for electric vehicles, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program that comes down through the states. So we're working with PennDOT on that. Just to review briefly, most of the work up until this point has been related to major corridors throughout the state. PennDOT is supporting and sponsoring the funding and placement of those locations on through routes, mostly interstates, not entirely, but mostly. As of yesterday, they have 13 sites that they've been working on and supported that are up and going. And they are second or third in the nation on the number of sites being opened across the country. Where it comes back down to us at the MPO a little bit more closely is the next phase of the program contains what's called community charging initiative. And so that this is sort of a filtering down of location and sponsorship and funding and planning for these stations. And community charging, as the title implies, is looking more at specific communities and types of locations rather than corridors. So what PennDOT has asked us to do is to come up with a list of locations, preferred locations from our perspective, and use cases, types of places to locate charging stations, and submit those to them by the end of July. And as part of this, they've also asked us to host some community charging public meetings. We're going to do 2 of them. We had the first one yesterday that the 4 of us, Steve and Kristen and Tina and myself, were over in Shamokin. And we had a small group, but a very interesting and useful, I think, conversation on these topics. We also have, through social media and other means, sent out survey forms for types of locations and specific locations. And that's still open. And if anybody's interested in having more paper copies of it, we've got kind of the announcement where people can look at this online or in paper and scan the QR code and get to a map where they can drop possible locations for charging stations as well as community charging uses. Survey use cases, surveys. So if anybody would like to have those in a paper version, please stop by and pick one up, and things can be posted around the community. The second and last meeting will be next Tuesday in Lock Haven at the STEP office there. And it'll be at 6 to 8 p.m., pretty much the same way that yesterday went. I think we've got a pretty good turnout planned for that one. And PennDOT is part of those meetings. So the NEVI folks were there yesterday. They'll be there on Tuesday, and they'll be listening and hearing the comments and suggestions that people have for locating charging stations. Should also lastly mention that even though these are in 2 separate locations and 2 specific locations, they're regional meetings, so that this is not just directed toward people in Lock Haven or Clinton County or Northumberland or Shamokin like yesterday. So these are our regional meetings. And if you're not from Clinton County or Northumberland County or those areas, you're still invited to that. So you can register online from our website or see the paper copies of the information. And anybody that can come on Tuesday, we'll look forward to seeing you there, but please publicize that if you can.
Great, thanks, Don. We were glad to have Colton join us yesterday from PennDOT Central Office, and as Don mentioned, very interesting questions being asked by the group. We're glad to get them engaged, and hopefully if we can get our survey responses to the site to increase a little bit more, that'd be great. But we're taking hard copies in case people don't have internet access, and they can register their concerns, and we can drop some points on the map for locations they think make the best sense for these investments in the charging stations. So
yeah, I should just mention real quick, in your packet, there are the slides we used yesterday, but of specific interest is the PennDOT portion of the presentation. So you can see some of the updated information that was presented yesterday, but that's current from PennDOT as well.
Don, I have a question. Has there been any freeze or rescission of the federal money from the new administration?
Yep, good question. And usually the first thing that comes up when we have these discussions too, the official formal answer from PennDOT still is that the program is still moving forward. The funding for the community charging, I think how I would describe it is it would be difficult to stop the funding for it. That doesn't mean, as the president said the other day, never say never, but it's looking pretty positive right now that this will be able to go forward. That is not etched in stone at this point, but our official guidance is that this program will keep going from what PennDOT has told us, and they seem to be pretty optimistic at this point. And Steve would like to add anything? Or
yeah, just say it's paused. Guidance is being revised, but it should not be eliminated unless there's an act of Congress, essentially.
Yeah, it would take that.
Should still see the investment. I don't know if Nathan or anybody else wants to comment on that, but that's kind of the path we're taking, that there will be community charging investments in our region. But the exact shape of the guidance or, some of the particulars there, might be revised from what they were in the past issuances. But hopefully we'll get this official build out of the alternative fuels corridor designated, and then the community level investments can occur.
And for that, it's about a $2 million target for SEDA COG counties. So that's the number that they're looking at.
And then Jeff Eisman, was your hand raised on this matter?
Yeah, but you answered my question, so thanks.
Yeah, glad to do that. We can anticipate and answer questions. Thank you, Don. These are two verbal things, so we'll make up ground here quick on item K. I mentioned we'll be coordinating those meetings with each of the counties and your bridge engineers and PennDOT staff. So look for those hopefully to start trickle out next week, and we can share some materials in advance and then go through your priorities for this next tip update. And if you have comments about tweaking the process, at all here early on, just let us know. Then item L, I'll just mention active transportation committee update. Our next meeting of that full group is on May 14th. So next week, if you didn't get the notice went off yesterday with the agenda, or you're interested, let me know. The guest presentation at that meeting will be Ann Mesner, our friends at the Center County MPO. She's going to present their countywide active transportation plan that was recently finalized and adopted, and talk about what went into that and how they're going to implement it. So I think that'll be of interest. And as we will be looking to update our regional bike ped active transportation plan, we'll hopefully have some pointers there with what they had done in Center County. So let us know if you need to get those materials, or if you want to participate. That's a hybrid meeting. You can come here, or you can join it through Teams. And now we're into member forum. We have some updates there. Updates there is typical in the packet, starting on page 70. But open the floor here if there's items anybody wants to bring up from the organizations, or any questions at this time. Now we're 10 minutes over, so maybe that'll stifle some of the offerings, but feel free to let us know. Stay a little bit, linger afterwards as you're in the room if you want to discuss anything. And if there's something you want to hear again at a future MPO meeting, just let us know. We can work to arrange that. So if there's nothing further, we're up to the adjournment phase, and then to reconvene on July 18th in the summer months here. So we have a motion to adjourn. Greg, I'll give you that first. Do you have a second? Lincoln, you're on for the second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? I know you want to stay longer, but I guess we'll close and adjourn. So thanks everyone for joining us. We'll look to get together July 18th and continue the conversation.